Everyone in the city knew Charles Whitmore, the ruthless billionaire who built an empire with cold precision. But no one knew the pain behind his iron mask. Behind his marble walls, his only daughter, Amelia, sat in silence, paralyzed from the waist down after a tragic accident that stole her childhood and her smile. Until one day, he returned home early, and what he saw in his garden shattered everything he thought he knew about loyalty, love, and the simple act of dancing. What he witnessed between his daughter and his black chauffeur, an employee he'd barely spoken to, would turn his world upside down and lead to a chain of events no one could have imagined. Asterisk. Charles Whitmore wasn't just a man of wealth, he was a symbol of it. A titan of industry. The kind of billionaire whose very name opened doors, silenced rooms, and struck fear into the hearts of competitors. But for all the fortune he amassed, private jets, sprawling estates, a fleet of cars, and an art collection that would make royalty blush, his home was filled with something colder than solitude. Grief. Grief had quietly taken residence in the marble halls and floor-to-ceiling windows of the Whitmore estate ever since the accident. Charles's wife, Isabel, had passed away during childbirth, leaving him to raise their daughter, Amelia, alone. And for a time he tried. But when Amelia was 9 years old, everything changed in a heartbeat. She had been dancing by the edge of the pool, her favorite white ballet slippers soaked from chasing butterflies in the early spring drizzle. Charles had only turned away for a moment to answer a business call. He heard the splash, then the scream. When he pulled her from the water, her tiny body was limp. She survived, but her spine did not. Doctors confirmed the worst: complete paralysis from the waist down. A girl who once twirled like sunlight now sat still like stone. In the years that followed, Charles buried himself in work. He told himself it was to fund Amelia's care, to provide her the best therapists and medical technologies. But deep down, it was guilt and fear. He didn't know how to face her anymore, not her silence, not her sadness, not the haunting way she stared out the window as if waiting for a world that had moved on without her. He hired the best caregivers, tutors, and staff, but they came and went. None could reach her. Until one day, he hired a new driver. A quiet, broad-shouldered man named Elijah. Charles barely noticed him at first. Elijah spoke only when spoken to. He was punctual, respectful, and kept to his duties. Hired through an agency, he didn't come with glowing letters of recommendation or Ivy League polish. Just calm eyes, a steady hand behind the wheel, and a silence that somehow felt warm instead of empty. Weeks passed, then months. Charles remained detached, working long hours in the city, returning home only to check on Amelia's health reports. The staff gave the usual updates. She ate. She refused therapy again. She didn't speak today. The same lines, over and over, until Charles stopped listening altogether. What he didn't know, what no one bothered to tell him, was that something had started to change in the garden. It began with music. Faint notes coming from Amelia's open window. Then small movements. Elijah would wheel her into the sunshine in the late afternoons when the nurses were on break. He brought an old portable speaker and played soul classics: Sam Cooke, Otis Redding, Nina Simone. Music his grandmother used to hum while cleaning on Sundays. He once said softly to Amelia, and Amelia, fragile, withdrawn. Amelia began to smile. She didn't speak, but her hands tapped her lap with the rhythm. One day, she even laughed. It was barely audible, a whisper of joy, but Elijah heard it. And from then on, every afternoon, they danced. Not the way most people would. Elijah would take her hands in his and move gently to the rhythm, guiding her chair around the garden path like a slow waltz. Sometimes he'd spin around her dramatically, making her giggle. She wasn't a ballerina anymore, but in those moments, she was something more. Alive. No one told Charles. No one dared. Until the day he came home early, unannounced, For the first time in years, he entered through the side gate, lost in a call with Tokyo investors. Then, a sound made him pause. Laughter. Light. Effervescent. Real. He walked toward it, toward the garden, and froze behind the hedge. There she was, Amelia, laughing, her head thrown back, her hands raised. And there, in the middle of his rose garden, dancing with her like the world didn't matter, was Elijah, the chauffeur, his driver, spinning like a Broadway dancer, bowing as if she were royalty. The music played, the wind stirred the trees, and Charles felt something inside him crack. He didn't step forward, not yet. He couldn't. All his power, all his pride, none of it prepared him for the tears that welled in his eyes. His daughter wasn't broken. She wasn't gone. She had just needed something he'd never thought to give: connection, music, presence. And from a man Charles had never taken the time to know. And in that moment, everything began to change. The following morning, sunlight filtered through the vast stained glass windows of the Lancaster estate, casting kaleidoscopic hues onto the marbled floors. Mr. Benjamin Lancaster, known simply as Mr. B to most of the household staff, paced back and forth in his study. His mind wasn't on market reports or international business mergers today. No, it was on the quiet scene he had stumbled upon the night before. The image of his daughter giggling freely, joyfully, while swaying in the arms of their black driver lingered in his thoughts like a stubborn whisper. He hadn't known how to react. The sheer spontaneity of it all. Ella, who hadn't spoken more than a few words in weeks, was laughing. And Thomas, the driver, Benjamin had always regarded him with distant professionalism. Courteous, efficient, invisible in the way that help often was in the lives of the wealthy. But last night, he had done something else entirely: vibrant, gentle, alive. It shook Benjamin, not because it was wrong, but because it was so unexpected. Downstairs, Ella sat by the window, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing shapes in the condensation on her glass of juice. Her nurse had gone to fetch medication, leaving her alone for a moment. She watched the garden come alive, bees darting between lily, butterflies resting on the tall hydrangeas. But her eyes kept darting toward the garage where the drivers gathered during off hours. She waited, wondering if Thomas would appear. Last night felt like a secret shared between two souls who shouldn't have met, yet somehow had. When she had asked him, in a barely audible whisper, if he knew how to dance, his surprised smile was like a light switch flicked on in a dark room. And when he gently took her hands, guiding her wheelchair in time to the soft music coming from the kitchen radio, Ella had felt something she thought she'd lost forever: dignity, womanhood, joy. "Miss Ella?" A voice called gently. She turned to find Thomas, dressed in his morning uniform, standing by the garden arch. "I didn't want to interrupt," he said softly, "but I brought you something." From behind his back, he revealed a small box of chocolate-covered strawberries, her favorite. Her eyes lit up. "You remembered?" He chuckled. Hard to forget someone making such a fuss about strawberries on toast that day. Ella's lips curled upward. That wasn't a fuss. That was survival. They both laughed, and for a moment, the air between them was free of roles and expectations. It was just a man and a woman, one seated, one standing, sharing a simple pleasure. But behind an upper window curtain, a pair of eyes observed everything. Mrs. Gretchen Holloway, the housekeeper of 2 decades, narrowed her eyes as she watched Thomas hand over the strawberries. In her mind, lines had already begun to blur, and she didn't like it. She respected Thomas, yes, but boundaries were meant to protect, especially for girls like Ella, born into ivory towers, and boys like Thomas, who came from much humbler places. Later that day, Gretchen found herself in the study, subtly raising the topic. Double quote, "Sir, if I may speak freely," she began. "It's about your daughter and the driver." Benjamin looked up from his papers. "I'm not sure what I witnessed last night or this morning, but it seems quite personal." Too personal. He raised an eyebrow. You think she's in danger? No, sir, but people will talk. These kinds of connections, they rarely end neatly. And for someone like Miss Ella, Benjamin sat back. A flicker of protectiveness crept into his eyes. For someone like Ella. What? Gretchen paused, then carefully said, she's vulnerable. And he's, well, you know, not from our world. There it was. The unsaid truth hiding beneath years of politeness. Benjamin didn't respond. Not immediately. Because even though Gretchen's warning felt intrusive, he knew it was echoed somewhere deep inside his own cautious heart. That evening, just as dusk painted the sky in deep orange and purple, Ella wheeled herself toward the kitchen. The house had fallen into its usual hush, a lull between the clatter of dinner and the silence of night. She heard humming from around the corner. That warm, steady voice, Thomas. She paused, listening. Why do you hum? She asked. As she turned the corner, Thomas looked up, startled, and then smiled. It helps me think. Ella tilted her head. It makes me feel safe. He handed her a cup of chamomile tea. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away quickly. I read somewhere, he said softly, that music is memory's favorite language. Maybe that's why you smiled yesterday. Your body remembered joy. Ella looked down, blinking. You talk like a poet. I drive like one too, he joked. She laughed again. A different kind of laugh, softer, more vulnerable. But from the end of the hallway, a deep voice cut through the stillness. Thomas. They both turned. It was Benjamin. The driver straightened. Sir. Benjamin's eyes scanned the scene. The cup in her hands, the lingering gaze, the electricity in the air. But instead of anger, his tone surprised them both. I'd like to speak with you. Just the two of us. Ella's eyes widened. Thomas gave a small nod and followed Mr. B into the drawing room. Inside, the billionaire closed the door behind them and gestured to a seat. Tell me, Benjamin began, leaning against his fireplace, how long have you known my daughter? Thomas didn't hesitate. 6 months and 14 days, sir. That specific? Thomas smiled gently. I noticed her the first day I drove here. But I really met her the day her wheelchair got stuck near the lake. No one saw. I helped. Benjamin nodded. Slowly. And these dances? These visits? What do they mean to you? Thomas looked up, steady and calm. They mean she's alive. That I get to see her light. And that for once, I'm not just a driver. I'm a man who sees her, not her condition. Silence. Then Benjamin asked, do you love her? Thomas hesitated, but not out of doubt. I could, if she lets me. If you let me. Benjamin's jaw tensed, but he didn't erupt. Instead, he said something that no one expected. Then prove it. Thomas blinked. Sir? I'm taking Ella to the charity gala at the governor's mansion this Friday. Black tie, you'll be there. As her escort. Thomas's heart skipped. I don't own a tux. You do now. Benjamin reached for a gold embossed card and handed it to him. Don't disappoint me. Or her. Thomas stared at the card, then back at the man whose blessing had once seemed impossible. The following day, something shifted in the rhythm of the household. The air felt different, as though something sacred had been shared and could never be unshared again. Though neither the billionaire Mr. Everett Langston nor his daughter. Amara brought up the events of the previous night. An invisible thread of awareness connected them all. The house staff seemed to move more quietly, as if tiptoeing around a story they didn't know but could feel. Amara, too, had changed. Her eyes, which often seemed adrift in silent resignation, now had purpose. She asked to be wheeled outside more often, to feel the wind and watch the trees sway. She spoke more, not in volumes, but in intention. Her sentences were clearer, her gaze sharper. She asked for Malik specifically that morning, requesting his help to take her to the back gardens instead of the nurse's aide. Malik complied without hesitation. He was gentle but firm with the wheelchair, avoiding bumps, engaging her in easy, Conversation. Amara smiled once, just once, but for Malik, it felt like winning a Lifetime Achievement Award. As they reached the shaded stone path leading through the manicured gardens, Malik paused. He bent slightly, plucked a small lavender blossom from the edge of a bush, and handed it to her. "It smells better when you crush it slightly," he said softly, "like it's sharing its secret with you." Amara took the flower in her lap, pressing it between her fingers. She raised it to her nose. Her lips curved slightly, almost a smirk. "Thank you," she said quietly. Malik chuckled. "You said more today than you did the entire last month combined." Amara looked at him. "I don't talk to people who don't see me." The weight of that statement hit him square in the chest. No dramatics, no sentimentality, just truth. Malik didn't know her world, but in that moment, he understood that the glass bubble Amara lived in wasn't built by her injury. It was built by people who pitied her, managed her, and overlooked her all at once. "You're not invisible to me," Malik said gently. She nodded, not needing to be convinced. She already knew. Later that afternoon, Mr. Langston summoned Malik to his study. The room was everything you'd expect. Oak-paneled walls, floor-to-ceiling shelves of leather-bound books, and an intimidatingly large desk behind which he sat like a monarch. "I watched the footage," Mr. Langston said bluntly. Malik stood stiffly. "Sir, my security system recorded you and Amara last night dancing." Malik's heart sank. He hadn't even considered that the mansion might have internal surveillance. "I apologize if that was out of line, sir. It won't happen again." The billionaire leaned forward. "What gave you the right?" Malik swallowed hard. She asked. Langston's brow twitched slightly. "And you didn't think to ask me?" "No, sir." A long silence followed. Then, Everett Langston did something unexpected. He opened a drawer, took out a bottle of whiskey, poured a glass, and sipped it. "She hasn't smiled like that since the accident," he murmured. "Not once." Malik stayed silent, uncertain if that was permission or indictment. Everett sighed, resting his fingers on his temple. "She used to dance before the accident. Ballet, jazz, even tap when she was little. Her mother loved to dance. She'd sweep Amara around the ballroom like a feather in the wind." There was pain in his voice, a grief that wasn't just for a daughter who couldn't dance, but for a life that had shattered in pieces too small to name. "I didn't know that, sir," Malik said softly. "You do now," Langston replied, eyes fixed on the window. "And for some reason, she let you in." It wasn't a dismissal, but it wasn't exactly an invitation either. It was more like a warning bell in a foggy harbor, something distant and ominous, yet strangely hopeful. That night, Malik couldn't sleep. He lay on his bed in the servants' quarters, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering what invisible lines he had crossed, and whether crossing them had truly been wrong. Could simple acts of kindness be dangerous when power and wealth were involved? The next day brought a new twist. Amara asked Malik for music. Not just any music, but the old jazz standards: Ella Fitzgerald, Louis Armstrong, Billie Holiday. "I like the way they let you feel without words," she said. So Malik brought a Bluetooth speaker into the garden. As "Dream a Little Dream of Me" floated through the air, Malik noticed her fingers tapping ever so slightly to the rhythm. He offered his hand again. "Would you like to dance?" Amara hesitated, then shook her head. "Not today," she said, "but I want to watch." "You watch me?" She nodded. "You have joy in your body. It's contagious." Malik, cheeks slightly flushed, began to move. Slowly, at first, then with more flair. The rhythm found his limbs, and he danced like he did in his old neighborhood, freely, unapologetically. Amara laughed once, then again, covering her mouth just like her mother used to. She didn't even notice that her father had been watching from the second-floor balcony the entire time. As the days passed, Eleanor's improvement became visible, not just to Charles, but to the entire household. The once quiet girl who only stared at walls or the sky had begun to speak more, smile more, and laugh, a sound so pure and rare in that mansion that it sent a jolt through every staff member who heard it. And at the center of it all was Jamal, the chauffeur who had long stopped being just the driver. One rainy afternoon, the sky cried endlessly, blanketing the city in soft gray. Charles had left for an unexpected business trip, and the estate was quieter than usual. Eleanor, now growing bold in Jamal's presence, asked him if they could go outside. Outside? He asked, glancing at the gloomy sky through the tall windows. It's pouring. I want to feel it, the rain, on my skin. I want to remember what life feels like, she said softly, her eyes glistening. Without hesitation, Jamal wheeled her out to the stone terrace, the rain drenching them both instantly. The pitter-patter of raindrops against her face made Eleanor laugh, a deep, honest laugh that echoed under the cloudy sky. Her silk blouse clung to her frail frame, and her hair, now wet and loose, stuck to her cheeks. But she didn't care. For the first time in years, she felt alive. Jamal stood before her, soaked to the bone, and then, without a word, began dancing. It wasn't a performance. It was a declaration. A joyful, wild, spontaneous movement, his arms moving with grace, feet sliding across the wet tiles, body spinning, splashing puddles like a boy who had never known pain. Eleanor clapped and cheered, tears and rain blending on her cheeks. Then he stepped closer, knelt beside her wheelchair, and extended a hand. May I have this dance? She hesitated, looking down at her legs, her useless, paralyzed legs. I can't. You don't need to, he said. I'll dance with your heart. He wrapped one arm around her shoulders, placed the other in her hand, and began swaying gently with her, the wheelchair turning slowly as they twirled in the rain. Her head rested against his chest. Their movement was clumsy but pure. Together, they created a moment so intimate and tender that even the house seemed to hold its breath. Unbeknownst to them, they weren't alone. From the second-floor balcony, Charles had arrived early and was frozen in place, watching his daughter laugh in the arms of his chauffeur in the pouring rain. At first, he felt fury, a blind rage burning in his chest. But as he watched the scene below, his anger melted into confusion, and then into something else entirely. His daughter looked alive. He couldn't remember the last time he had seen her like this. Not in the sterile halls of therapy centers, not under the supervision of renowned doctors, but here, in the arms of a man from the streets, his driver. She glowed. Charles stood silently, his eyes misted not from rain but from realization. Perhaps he had been wrong. Perhaps money, medicine, and high society had failed her in ways that this man's simple kindness had not. The next morning, Jamal received a call. Come to the library, the butler said stiffly. Jamal entered cautiously. Charles sat in his leather chair, hands steepled beneath his chin, staring silently at the fireplace. You danced with my daughter, he said coldly, without looking at him. Double quotes. Yes, sir, Jamal said, his heart pounding. Do you love her? Jamal blinked. Sir? It's a simple question. I don't know if I can answer that, sir. I care for her. More than I've ever cared for anyone. But love, he paused, looking down. Maybe it is. Maybe it's becoming that. Silence. Then Charles stood and walked toward him. If you ever hurt her, you'll disappear so fast no one will remember your name. But if what I saw yesterday was real, then maybe, just maybe, you're what she needs. Jamal's voice cracked. I'd never hurt her, sir. Never. Charles nodded once, then turned away. Take her out today, somewhere public. Let the world see her smile. That afternoon, Eleanor and Jamal strolled through a city park. Her wheelchair glided over cobblestones while birds chirped from branches overhead. Children played. Strangers smiled. For the first time, Eleanor wasn't hiding from the world. She was part of it, and she held Jamal's hand the entire time. The next morning brought with it a hush of anticipation across the household. The sun peeked through the sprawling mansion's tall windows, casting golden streaks over the marble floors. Though the staff moved about their duties, something was different. Their steps were quieter, their conversations in whispers, as if the house itself was holding its breath. In the east wing, Caroline was already up and waiting. She had requested that her nurse let her dress early, selecting a soft pink blouse and linen pants. She had also asked to be wheeled out to the Rose Garden, a place she had avoided for years. It was the same garden her mother had once loved, the place of afternoon teas and laughter before everything went silent. As she waited under the blossoming pergola, her fingers anxiously gripped the arms of her wheelchair. Then, from behind the trimmed hedge, Elijah appeared, freshly dressed in his modest but neat driver's uniform, his expression a mixture of nerves and awe. "Hi," she said, her voice light but steady. Elijah nodded. "Good morning, Miss Caroline." She smiled. "I thought maybe we could try again." His eyes lit up. "The dance?" "Yes," she whispered. "But this time in the garden, if you don't mind." Without a word, Elijah extended his hand. Caroline placed hers in his. He gently helped her into a standing position with the help of the supportive bars installed on her chair. She took 2 shaky steps, relying on his strength to keep her balanced. Then slowly, they began to move. It wasn't a polished dance. It wasn't graceful. But it was filled with something far deeper than rhythm. There was trust, courage, and joy. The birds chirped above them. The wind rustled the roses. And behind one of the stone pillars, unnoticed, Reginald watched again. But this time, he didn't frown. He stood frozen, a forgotten coffee cup in his hand, witnessing his daughter, his paralyzed daughter, smiling wider than he'd seen in years. She wasn't simply being wheeled to therapy or helped into bed. She was alive, dancing, laughing, and holding herself upright with the support of a young man he'd once dismissed as just a driver. Reginald felt something crack inside him. Not with anger or humiliation, but with grief. Grief for all the years lost, for all the dinners eaten in silence, for the holidays spent traveling alone, for the daughter he loved but didn't know how to reach. When Elijah gently helped Caroline sit back down, she looked up and saw her father. Her smile faded, unsure what reaction would come. Elijah stepped away instinctively, lowering his eyes, but Reginald raised his hand not to scold, but to wave. He walked toward them slowly. Caroline's heart raced. Elijah's hands clenched. Reginald looked at them both for a long moment. Then he said softly, "That was beautiful." Neither of them spoke. Caroline's eyes welled with tears. Reginald cleared his throat. "You've made progress, Caroline. I haven't seen you stand like that in so long." "I didn't think I could," she said quietly. "But he believed I could." Reginald looked at Elijah. His tone was still formal, but not cold. "Elijah, could you join me for a cup of tea in the study?" Caroline stiffened. "Father, he didn't." "It's okay," Elijah interrupted gently. "I'll go." As they walked back toward the house, Caroline stared after them, unsure of what had just happened. Inside the study, Reginald poured 2 cups of tea, something he never did himself. He handed one to Elijah and sat across from him. "I've been watching," Reginald said finally. "And I realize now I don't know my daughter at all. But you you seem to." Elijah shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I didn't mean any disrespect. She asked me to dance. It helped her feel free again." Reginald nodded. "And you helped her find that freedom." He took a sip of tea. "I thought money could fix everything," he continued. "Doctors, therapy, specialists. I never thought what she needed was someone who saw her." Beyond the chair, Elijah didn't speak. Reginald leaned forward. "You're not just a driver anymore, Elijah. I want you to stay. As a companion, a helper. Someone who makes her believe in herself again." The young man blinked. "Are you sure, sir?" Reginald smiled faintly. "For the first time in years, I'm very sure of something." At that moment, in a mansion once filled with quiet sorrow, something shifted. Not just for Caroline or Elijah, but for Reginald. What started as a silent dance had become a loud awakening. Days turned into weeks, and the Whitmore estate began to pulse with a new energy, one born not of wealth, but of hope and healing. Charles, once a distant figure, found himself drawn into moments he had long avoided. He watched as Amelia laughed, as Elijah patiently listened to her stories, and as the two shared a bond that seemed to mend what money could not buy. The charity gala arrived, a night that would change everything. Amelia, dressed in a soft blue gown, her hair swept back elegantly, was the star. Beside her, Elijah stood in a tailored tuxedo, nervous yet proud. Charles observed from across the grand ballroom, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and disbelief. This was more than a dance. It was a declaration that his daughter was alive, whole, and deserving of joy. As Amelia and Elijah took to the floor, moving gracefully despite her wheelchair, the crowd fell silent, captivated by their undeniable connection. Whispers spread, the driver and the billionaire's daughter dancing as equals, rewriting every expectation. In that moment, Charles realized something profound. Love, compassion, and acceptance could break the strongest chains, whether physical or social. And as the music played on, the walls of the mansion echoed not with silence or sorrow, but with the sound of a new beginning.